We're on. Hi guys, so welcome back to the channel. My name's Rebecca for those of you who have not yet met me, and I run this channel where I talk about all things accounting, finance, investment and Excel related. So if you like this kind of stuff, then please do consider subscribing, as it really does help the channel grow. Now today I just thought that I'd talk to you very quickly about what I believe makes a good auditor, because I know that audit is obviously taught in one of the AAT subjects, which is great, but it doesn't necessarily give you the tools that you need to be a good auditor. And when I say good auditor, I mean not just from a employer's perspective, but also from a client perspective. So a good few years ago now, I used to do audit. So that was at the very start of my career. So I was an audit manager for a little bit, and I also worked my way up from audit semi-senior all the way up. And yeah, I dabbled between audits on large, small clients and also accounting, so I've got a bit of a mixed bag of a background really. So yeah, I've done a little bit of everything at this point, or it feels that way anyway. Yeah, so let's look at what makes a good auditor. So I'd say number one definitely is communication, because I've had it many times in the past where I have been working away and fully aware that there's an audit going on, and obviously being audited from an external auditor. And I've had auditors literally stick diary entries into my calendar without any kind of prior communication. And that, first of all, is going to get you back up a little bit as the client, because it's just, you know, presuming you have got nothing better to do than answer audit queries, which would be an ideal world, but unfortunately the business still has to be run on top of an audit ongoing. So usually your clients have got month end to do, they've got year end to do, they're trying to answer your queries and, you know, head of finance's queries, CFO queries. Just make sure that you keep good communication with your client if you are auditing, and let them know in advance if you need them for something, or if you want to arrange a phone call or a quick 5-minute chat. So number two for me would be, when you're working on an audit, you've got a lot of individuals who are doing different tasks and audits. Specifically, if you work for the likes of PWC, Deloitte, BDO, the larger of the audit firms, then you're going to have individuals working on, you know, debtors, creditors. Somebody might be working on one company whilst you work on another, that sort of thing. And I'd say that it's just very important that you communicate with your team. And what I mean by that is, I've seen quite a lot of times in the past before today that individuals will request a piece of information, and then that same piece of information is requested by another individual within your team that might not necessarily have told you that they've already requested that information. So sometimes it's best to communicate whether or not that information has been requested before, so that you can get that off that other team member quite quickly, rather than having to have a conversation with the client where they say, oh, you know, this has already been requested, what are you requesting this information for? So just to avoid that duplication, I'd say definitely communicate with the team a little bit more. It's all about communication. So say the third thing would be that to make sure that when you're making an audit request, that you're very clear with what it is that you're asking for. Because if you request information off a client and they provide that information to you, then don't be surprised if later down the line you turn around and say, oh, I didn't mean that, I meant this instead. That they say back, well, you requested that information and that was provided on time, because that's just going to delay your audit and delay your audit work. So just make it really, really simply clear what it is that you're asking for and why. So let's move on to number four. So number four, I'd say what makes a good auditor, a really good auditor, is just making sure that you've got a really good understanding of the business, because there is nothing worse than when you've explained something to an auditor and explained how a business works and the organisation, etc., for them to later question how the business works after they've undertook testing, because you would expect that the testing that they have performed on the business has been on their understanding of the business, as well as the risk of the business, etc. So it doesn't give the client a great deal of confidence in you if you're later down the line questioning. So I'd say early on, if you're new to an audit, even if, you know, the audit manager has given you the lowdown of the audit, it's fine to ask questions early on and get that good understanding of the business. Clients don't mind that. They'd rather you ask questions early on and really understand what's going on than asking those questions later down the line when you've been on the audit for 2 years. It just doesn't look the best. And it doesn't give the client a great deal of confidence. Tip number 5. So this doesn't happen too much these days, because everybody's obviously working from home as much as possible, and we're all having video conference calls, that sort of thing. But I'd say never ever If you can avoid it, and I know sometimes you can't because of traffic, etc., but make sure that you turn up to meetings on time. It works both ways, so if you as the auditor set up a meeting with the client, then you expect them to be there, and vice versa. So if you're expecting a phone call from the client at a certain time, or if you set up a meeting at a certain time, then please make sure that you do turn up on time, because if you don't show up on time, then it doesn't exactly give the best view of the auditor and the company that they work for if you're constantly late to phone calls and video chat meetings. So my next tip, sometimes when you're first starting out on audit, you're a little bit shy. Maybe it might be your first time working in accounting and finance because you've just started your ACA studies, your ACCA studies, whatever it might be. So you might be a little bit lacking in confidence in asking the client questions. But what I'd say is actually, if you are again asking information from the client and you're not quite sure about what information they should be providing, or you're not entirely sure of the information that they've given to you, the best thing to do is to set up a meeting as soon as you possibly can, or even on an email to say, I know you've provided this information, but do you mind if we walk through it for 5-10 minutes, because otherwise you yourself are on a timescale, so you might be only on this audit for 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even less, so you don't have time to try to work out what the schedule a client has provided you means or what it relates to. So the best thing to do to stop wasting those hours and that time is to just set up a call to talk through it, and that way you'll be saving yourself time and also potentially saving the client time, because if you've got to go and ask them further questions about that sheet of information later down the line, or ask them to explain something, then that's just wasting their time. So it's best to get them at the time when they're already available providing that information to you, or just as soon as possible. There's a fly on the window. I've forgotten how many tips I've given now, so I'm just going to reel off some things. One thing I'd say is the number one thing that I've heard, I don't know how many times since working as an accountant, not an auditor, is the expression, I'm an auditor, not an accountant. Please don't say that to your clients, because again, it doesn't give them much confidence in you yourself as the auditor, and it also sort of makes them question your understanding of accounting in general, so don't say that. Please don't say that. So the next item that I think makes a good auditor is an auditor who sets up meaningful phone calls, because, and when I say phone calls, I mean anything from video calls, I can't speak English, anything from video calls to phone calls, because there's nothing worse again than being on a call with an auditor who could have said what lasted for an hour in a meeting in about 10 minutes. So you don't want to be wasting the client's time, and you definitely don't want to be wasting your own time. You know, if you said all you need to say on a phone call, end the phone call. The client would be quite happy to end that phone call to get on with whatever it is that they're doing. But definitely don't just set up phone calls for the sake of setting them up. So I know a lot of auditors these days like to have like daily phone calls. Well, that's fine if there's something to speak about daily, but if you find that after a couple of days that's not necessary, then set them up weekly, or however you think is timely enough. But definitely take that into consideration when you're setting up those kind of phone calls. So the next thing that I think makes a good auditor is somebody who actually challenges the client in terms of, if there's a piece of information that you've received from a client and they're saying, you know, this explains all of the above, etc. Well, if you're not comfortable with that information, or you want further information, it's just having that confidence again to say, you know, this doesn't quite explain what I'm trying to get to, or my objective here, so can we look at another option? Because again, prime examples, I have had auditors come to me before today and say, yep, that's fine, I'm happy with that documentation, you know, we can clear that audit point off. And then a week later they come back to me and say, oh well, my manager's reviewed this information and actually it's not quite enough. And I just wish that they'd had, you know, the confidence again to say to their manager, I'm not quite sure about this piece of information that I've received, can we have a look at it? And you know, if I'm not comfortable, then we can ask for further documentation at that time. So you're just wasting their time with that information that you've said is sufficient, and you're wasting your own time. And as I said before, that's the last thing that you want to be doing on an audit. So I hope that's given you some pointers. I'm not sure we got to 10 there, but it doesn't matter. But just to help you with what a client might expect from an auditor and what makes a really good auditor. So if you found it useful, then please do give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment below if you agree, disagree, or if you've got any further comments to add. If you think there's something else that makes a good auditor, then please do put that in the comment section below. Consider subscribing as always, and I shall see you on the next video.